Hello there, and welcome to the CP7 podcast. My name's Palm.
And I'm Andy.
And together, we are Chrono Passion 7. Hello, and welcome back to your favourite watch-related podcast. We've got a milestone show today. We've got a very special guest. We actually have a real watchmaker on. We have someone who knows the nuts and bolts of what goes into these watches that we love. I'm absolutely delighted to introduce Aimee Cowhig from Subdial. How are you doing, Aimee?
I'm well, thank you. Thank you so much for having me on.
So a warm welcome, Aimee, as well from my side. It's great to have you on the show. As always, we have a lot of burning questions to ask you, especially as a watchmaker. We have so many curiosities to what's actually going on in these beautiful works of art which sit up on our wrists. But first of all, it'd be nice to find out what's sitting on your wrist today. So what are you wearing?
Thank you so much for asking. I am wearing a 1972 Piaget. It has a white gold integrated case and bracelet with a blue lapis lazuli dial. It is probably my favorite piece in my collection. Mechanical, just like stunning, super slender, super elegant, and it just always puts a smile on my face whenever I wear it. It's my favorite piece. You're going to start off strong, right? What about you, Palm? What have you got on?
What I've got, I thought it'd be fitting because Aimee did used to be a senior watchmaker for Omega 2. It's a quartz watch, so it's not mechanical, not automatic. It's my Omega Constellation perpetual calendar with a quartz movement. It's two-tone champagne argyle dial. I've had it recently serviced as well.
Is that the piece, if I'm right in thinking, you press the button in order to, or you press the crown as a button, essentially, in order to advance it through the perpetual calendar?
Yep, through the different phases. That's exactly right. I did test it. It does work. My service was a success because it went from 28th to 1st perfectly, just like clockwork.
Amazing. A successful service.
Yeah, so, Andy, what have you... Oh, Andy, what have you got on the wrist?
Well, I've been a bit watchless lately, as a few watches needed work by watchmakers, so it's a great topic for today. One really important watch to me has come back, and it's the JLC in 18 karat rose, like pink gold. It's a Calatrava, which my parents very kindly bought me for my 40th. Classic 50s bracelet as well. And yeah, it's great to have it back. Unfortunately, I can tell the story really quick with this one. I've had a bit of bad luck with watches lately, but I bought the watch from Chrono24, was running perfect, everything great, and this is a trick for everybody, I will say. Always check the spring bars, because I was just going out one evening, I went to turn the light off in the bathroom, and one of the spring bars just snapped. And as I went to turn the light, the GLC decided to go flying and hit the hard tile floor, shattering the balance staff.
That's so unfortunate. Oh my gosh, a balance staff break is not a pleasant one to deal with.
It's like finding a needle in a haystack to find the balance staff. So the watchmaker who worked on this, so actually shout out to Enric Timeless Machines who's done some amazing work for me recently. Based here in Barcelona, we had two options really, to try and find the balance stuff, or for him to fabricate one in the worst case scenario, which would have been quite expensive. But luckily, Palm stepped in this case, and it was Matt, right, who you reached out to in.
Yep, shout out to Matt for finding this
it's a
needle
big
in a
circle to all
haystack.
of this. Matt found it. So I sent the eBay link. It was in the US, and I was like to Enric, "Will this work?" And he said, "Yeah, let me check." Message for seller. It did, and there we go. It even had a shattered jewel as well on the main plate. I was like, "Is that going to make it more expensive? Like, they're quite cheap now?" And he's like, "Yeah, it's the jewel himself is cheap. It's the work getting it set and everything." I'm like,
"Yeah,
I don't know what you have to do, but great." So anyway.
No, it's lucky you were able to find a replacement though, because JLC, they've obviously been known for being the watchmaker's watchmaker. But the flip side of that is that they have about 1,000 different calibers, and so
to
actually
locate
it
it,
can be very difficult, particularly with them as a brand, to be able to find replacements for that. So really shout out to Matt.
super lucky. It's a crossover movement. It's a movement which is in Vacheron, and I think the actual balance staff was listed as for Vacheron, but it was a correct one for this one, luckily. So if it ever happens again, I might not be so lucky. So it's great to have it back.
Well, let's not
And
worry about that. Let's just
yeah, yeah,
focus on the
it is.
positive here.
I asked for the most solid spring bars to be put in the watch. So that's my tip of the day. I'm not a watchmaker, but any new watch purchases, especially vintage, check the spring bars, change them, make sure you've got good quality spring bars to avoid that happening. Anyway,
That's a
yeah,
good
there
top
you
tip.
go.
Change your spring bars or check your spring bars. Actually, it's interesting because I had mine about a month and it went for a service as well. Apparently, some water had got in. So we both had a bit of bad luck with that. This is neo vintage. So be careful with your neo vintage watches. Right. Okay. Let's kick off the show. Aimee, watchmaker extraordinaire. Tell us a bit about how you became a watchmaker, why you became a watchmaker, and then the story, the journey, and then also just to add a bit of sauce to that as well. Tell us typically what is a day in a watchmaker's life? What does it entail?
Yeah, that's a really good question, actually. And that's something that has changed throughout my watchmaking career. So I'll start at the beginning. So sit down, children. I'm going to tell you a story.
Pour yourself a drink.
So I have been in the industry since I was around 17. I originally was working in a retail space. We had watches and jewelry, and when I was very young and very junior, I didn't know anything about anything. And I essentially was hired as a sales associate to sell diamonds to unsuspecting men that were coming in looking for engagement rings for their partners. And after a few months of working there, I realized that actually the stones that we had that were for sale were quite overpriced for the quality standards that they had. And I will not name the place that I was working at because it's a well-known retailer. But I had this interest in watches, but I didn't know anything about them. You know, we just kind of had a bunch of brands in the windows. So it was a mixture of Tissot, Longines, Rado, Satina. The best brand that we had was Omega. And I just kind of started learning a little bit about them. And we actually had someone that covered from a different store who helped give me like a little bit of knowledge and a bit of insight from the get-go. And then I sold my first Omega watch that day, and I just felt like there was a little bit of a fire that had been lit in me. And so I kind of fell down this rabbit hole looking at the movement, and I was just like so besotted, like, wow, they have double-sided anti-reflective coating on their crystals. That's so interesting. And oh, they make their own in-house movement, because prior to that I was like, I think they're interesting, but you know, these Tissot's are £240, and this is an indication of, this is quite a few years ago now, this Omega Seamaster is £2,400. Like,
Yeah.
why would someone spend 10 times the amount of money on something that does the same thing? And I was just completely bamboozled by it. And after I kind of looked into it and did a bit of research, I was just completely amazed by them. You know, you kind of turn them around and you're like, wow, look at all these inner workings. And suddenly you wind this crown and everything just springs to life. All of these seemingly lifeless gears and springs and cogs. And as much as I didn't understand how it worked, I just thought that they were these beautiful objects. And I started learning more and more about the brands that we had. And after maybe a year or so, I was like, I think that I want to be a watchmaker. And this was a big enough company that they had watchmakers as part of their business. And so I had spoken to the general manager and said, like, I'd like to explore being a watchmaker. And they were like, no, that's not going to happen. You're a salesperson and get back in your lane. And I was like, okay, well, I guess they know best.
Just a quick question on that. Was that a thing that had happened before where a sales assistant or salesperson had become a watchmaker? Was that normal, or was that did you want to break the mold and make it happen?
I don't think it was something that ordinarily people would do. I think particularly in that store, in that area, a lot of younger people who would be working there, it would just be a stopgap of like, well, I'm just kind of working in a shop for a while before I move on to the next thing. Now, with that being said, there was a couple of people there who were really knowledgeable, who had clearly worked in the industry for many, many years. They had a lot of watch knowledge, they had a lot of jewelry knowledge. But I think for a lot of the younger people that were going in there, it was just like, well, I'm going to do this before I go on and do something else, like study at university or move on to the next thing. But I kind of persevered with it, and I was like, no, as much as he's told me no, like, I think this really is something that I want to do. And I think I'd had a couple of particular clients that had been assholes. And then I just
Oh, fair enough.
and then I decided, you know what, I don't want to work with the public anymore. I don't want to be public facing. I'm gonna hand in my notice without anything else lined up. And so I put my CV up on Reed or Indeed or something like that. And then I got approached by a recruiter who said, like, oh, you know, I see you've got experience with working with watches. Would you be interested in working for the Swatch Group? And I was like, oh my God, the Swatch Group, the company that owns Omega. I would love that. So it was a really entry junior level position that I took with them. It was quite a hard graft, but I remember before joining, I had handed in my notice, and the area manager for the retail store that I was working in came and was just like, "Oh, you're making a big mistake. You'll never become a watchmaker. You're just a salesperson, blah, blah, blah." And I would really love
No.
to be able to turn around. He actually left that business a few months after I left. I'd love to turn around to him now and be like, "Look at me now." I'm just
What are you
really,
doing?
I just really spirit in his face, but I actually have no idea where he is these days to do that. So I guess I'll just have to let it lie. So yeah, I started working for the Swatch Group, and I was in the spare parts and materials department doing administrative roles, answering the telephone. People would call up and be like, "Oh, can you tell me how much a strap is for this particular Seamaster?" And a lot of it was inventory management and locations. And we'd have these shipments coming in on a weekly basis of hundreds of £1,000s worth of parts. And it'd be like, okay, we've got to make sure that everything that we have ordered is actually here. So it required a keen eye for detail and lots of diligence. And I was like, this is great. This is kind of a step in the right direction. These are the kind of traits that they'll be looking for. And there were some really, really lovely individuals that kind of helped me with the next step of my journey, which was we had this amazing trainer at the Swatch Group called Pete. So big shout out to Pete if he listens to this.
I'm sure he
And
does.
I
Yeah.
had said that, like, "Oh, I want to be a watchmaker and I don't really know where to start." And he was like, "Well, have you ever tried taking a watch apart before?" And I was like, "No, but I think I'd be really good at it." And so he was like, "Okay, well, here's a little vintage Amiga movement. Go away, take it with you, and then see how you get on with it." So I ordered a £25 watchmaker toolkit from Amazon, which now that I know a little bit more about tools, I can appreciate quite how terrible it was as a as a training kit with tweezers that don't actually marry up at the end and screwdriver blades that actually aren't the right size for anything.
Amazon
And so
specials.
exactly. It really, really was. Special is one word for it. So I took this movement apart and I put it back together and I took photos because obviously I didn't know what anything was or where anything was going to go. And then it wasn't working. So I took it back and I was like, "Pete, I feel really awful. I took this thing apart and it's back together and now like it doesn't tick anymore." And he's like, "Okay." He took a look at it and he could see that I'd broken the pivot off one of the wheels. And so he gave it back to me and he was like, "Here it is again. Here's a replacement wheel. I want you to take it apart and do the same thing again." So I did the same thing again. I even made the same mistake again. I snapped the same pivot on the same wheel. But as I was trying to clamp this bridge down, bear in mind it was a vintage movement, so it is quite a small movement. It's not like the kind of thing that you use at watchmaking school when you're training to be a watchmaker. But so I felt the moment that this pivot snapped and I took it back the next day and I was all excited, but still a little bit distraught that I had not made it working. But I was like, "Pete, I know exactly what I've done this time. I know that it was that wheel that the same things happened again." And so he gave me one more wheel and he was like, "Aimee, I don't have an infinite supply of these. So you're going to need to make it or break it this time. And then, we'll have to draw a line on the sand." And so I remember so vividly having this watch in all of these pieces on my parents' dining room table and then putting it back together. And then all of a sudden it just sprung into life. And it was like
Oh
this
wow.
Frankenstein moment of like, it
Yeah.
lives. And it was just like so wonderful. And so I took it back and I was like, "Pete, I did it." And he was just like, "That is fantastic news." And so, he could see that I was very driven, I was very ambitious, and that, I wasn't necessarily deterred just because it didn't go 100% right the first time or even the second time. And I think, watchmaking is a lot of that, particularly when you're learning in the early days. And, I was very
Sorry,
lucky to have.
could that have been the sliding doors moment then? Could that have been like if you didn't put it together, would you have had another chance, or was that it?
Uh, it's
Three
difficult to
strikes and
know.
you're out.
Yeah, I mean, he really just gave me. It was an old movement that he just had like kicking around in his bench. So I don't think it was anything that's particularly
Okay, right.
meaningful. I
Yeah.
think it was more just a case of he was trying to see like, okay, either you have a bit of a knack for it, or you'll give up and be like, okay, maybe it's not for me. But because I kept going back and being like, no, I'm very determined to do this. And so I'm very lucky that actually there were a bunch of other very supportive people that were working for the Swatch Group at that time who also saw that I had some degree of potential. And our workshop manager at the time, who was female, which is very, unusual for watchmaking, she had said, like, "We would love to sponsor you to go to the school, to the British School of Watchmaking, because you would be such a valuable asset for us in the workshop." And to go from the conversation I'd had previously with the area manager who said, like, "You'll never make it as a watchmaker," to this person who had like so much belief was just like such a waking moment. So I went to the watchmaking school. I was there in Manchester for 2 years, had an amazing time, had a very stressful time. It's a really difficult set of skills to learn. Going through the interview process was very stressful and very challenging. There was, I want to say, like 400 applicants for 8 spaces. So it's quite competitive. And some of the other people that were applying, either already worked as technicians or polishers. They were working in far more kind of hands-on kind of roles. One of the guys who was absolutely phenomenal, he had an engineering degree from Cambridge and had been like a design engineer for Dyson for years. And I was like, I can't compete with this. But, I went through the
Yeah,
assessment
well,
and luckily I was able to compete and I was able to pass the assessments that were necessary. And obviously Swatch Group were very kind to kind of sponsor me through that process. And then, you go there for 2 years, you learn how to make parts and take watches apart, put them back together, identify faults and issues, and then you're a watchmaker at the end of it.
quite the story. Quite the story there. Did you find, like you just mentioned, women being in watchmaking as a career? Did you ever find that as something that held you back at all, or how
No,
was it?
not necessarily. I think that particularly in the UK, I don't see gender being a particular barrier necessarily from, if you're going through an application process that people will be filtering names out because,
Yeah.
oh, that looks like a feminine name or that looks like a masculine name. I think more than anything, there's just less women that think of it as a possibility of a career option. It's not something that comes up. There are less female watch collectors than there are male collectors. There are less women that are just kind of interested in watches than men are. So I think that naturally more men kind of gravitate towards it as a career possibility than women do. That's for the UK. I think in Switzerland, there's actually far more of a 50-50 split between like men and women that work within the industry. With that being said, I think that it tends to be the case that more women tend to do the production style roles where it's a case of like, okay, they might be doing dial making where you're fitting dial markers, or maybe it's hand fitting where let's say you work at Rolex, you'll be scheduled to do maybe 100 hand fittings a day where you just kind of have the watch in front of you, you fit the hands, you swipe it along, and then you do the next one, just kind of repetitive movements. So I think more women tend to end up falling into job roles like that in Switzerland than men do. And from my experience of what I've seen when I've been at various manufacturers, I do see that more men tend to be in the departments where you've got the complicated watchmaking or the R&D departments and things like that. So, as much as there is more women working in Switzerland, they're not necessarily doing as many of the roles from what I've seen that are the kind of more exciting repair and restoration work for watchmaking.
Okay, the real watchmaking, as in the nitty gritty, basically, right on the complications.
Yeah, exactly. It's so funny whenever I meet somebody new and I'm like, oh, I'm a watchmaker. And they're like, wow, so you make your own watches. And actually, like working in production and actually just putting things together for me is not the exciting bit about watchmaking. The more exciting bit is something that's in for repair or restoration, where it's a case of like, oh, actually, like this has developed a problem. Let me find what the problem is and see how it can be fixed. That is something you can get your teeth stuck into much more than just like assembling something together and then kind of passing it off to QC. We have a nice white lab coat and everything, so it's quite doctory.
Big gloves.
just little finger condoms, finger cots.
Yeah, finger condoms, finger doms.
Yes, exactly. I can't even begin to tell you how many times I'll leave the office where I'll kind of take my finger cots off throughout the day and just like shove them in my pocket, and then I'll come home and I've just got pockets full of little teeny tiny finger cots. There's been a few times that I've gone out after work for drinks, or I've gone to, I don't know, a rave or something, and then people are doing the pat down, and it's like, please don't question the tiny little finger condoms that you're putting out of
They might think, oh dear, poor girl.
Exactly. So yeah, after watchmaking school, I'd worked for Amiga for 9, nearly 10 years in total during my kind of tenure with them. And, I started off by working in like a sequential team. So back to your question earlier, Palm, about that, what does an average day look like for a watchmaker? When you first
Yeah.
graduate, it's very much a case of like, okay, you need to really nail down your fundamental understanding of watches and watchmaking. I think it's quite comparable to learning to drive a car. So when you go to watchmaking school, they teach you the theory behind it and they teach you the how you do these different things. And then you learn how to do these things in a specific way so that you can pass the test that they set. But then after you have completed the test, you really kind of learn the true kind of fundamentals of watchmaking, much like driving. So, you kind of learn to do your mirror signal maneuver, but how often do people actually do that on a day-to-day basis? Probably far less. You kind of learn that like that guy over there, he's going to cut me off on this roundabout, so I know that I'm going to kind of take my foot off the accelerator. But you don't learn those kind of things when you're learning to drive. And watchmaking is very similar. They teach you how to do the fault finding and all of this analysis work, but actually once you get into a flow of working on things more regularly, you're able to pick up far more nuance and kind of predict things before they've actually kind of presented themselves to you, which can just be like an interesting kind of facet that I guess I didn't really appreciate when I first started watchmaking. But, now that I've been doing it for quite a few years, it's something where it's like, oh, okay, this person has told me that the issues they're experiencing are X, Y, and Z. Okay, well, without even opening it, I'm quite confident 98% that actually the issue is going to be this. Yeah,
Okay,
so
wow.
after I had graduated from watchmaking school, I worked on the sequential department where you essentially service the same movement or similar derivatives of the same movement over and over again. And so, we had quite high targets that were expected in order to meet. So this would be a kind of standard Seamaster and Planet Ocean calibers, the previous one before they came out with their in-house caliber. And I think in the time that I worked in that department, I must have serviced around 1,000 of these particular like variations of this movement. So it means that you get really, really familiar with it and you can work on these pieces sequentially. So, you can be working on 3 of the same watch more or less at the same time. And you kind of space them out in your little cleaning baskets in this very specific way so that actually you can fit all of them in the cleaning machine at the same time and then you can reassemble them again. And then all of a sudden it's like, well, yeah, you can service 3 watches in a day. It's not that hard. And, you kind of learn to fault find with that particular caliber very, very quickly. And then, once you have proven yourself to be productive and the quality of your work is good and positive, then you can then advance onto something that's an in-house caliber, or then you can work onto something that is a chronograph or something that's slightly more complicated. And so that's generally how most watch brands tend to operate. You kind of need to prove yourself within this particular kind of capacity, and then opportunities might be available for further training and development. Some of that also relies on whether or not there is a space in a particular department. So sometimes you have to wait until somebody leaves or retires before you can then be considered to be kind of promoted into the next stage. So yeah, I worked in their main service centre for a number of years, and then my partner got a job in London, and so I was able to relocate to one of the Omega boutiques in London. So I worked on Regent Street for a number of years and I absolutely loved it there. We had a really lovely group of people that we worked with, and the training opportunities just absolutely skyrocketed for me. They wanted someone who was able to speak to any client about any piece that they were bringing in. And so because of that, they wanted me to be fully trained on all of the calibers that Omega offer training for. So it meant that they kind of just put me on a plane to Switzerland multiple times over the space of a couple of years, which was really unusual. Normally they'll want you to work on a particular caliber for maybe 2, 3, sometimes 4 years, and then they'll kind of give you an opportunity for something else. So it was a really wonderful experience that they had given me in order to kind of fast track this training. And so yeah, within 5 years of graduating watchmaking school, I had already kind of completed Amiga. That was it.
Wow. In a nutshell,
Yeah, Amiga completed it, mate.
That's good because that kind of led to one of my first questions was like, how long does it take from starting at the bottom, if you like, or an entry role within the Swatch Group or with Amiga to actually get to like a higher level? Like you were mentioning earlier, that you'd have to work on a particular movement where maybe it's up to 1,000 times. Like on average, how long would you say you would be doing that for? I know it depends on department openings for you to progress as well, like you mentioned, but do they ever like, okay, you at least need to be doing this for 6 months, or say you're a bit of a guru and you can show that you're really good at it in a month? Can you move faster, or is it kind of quite strict with how you progress there?
I guess I have two answers to that. So answer number one is this is a controversial answer actually. So to some extent, if you make yourself too good and too productive in a particular area, then you have a danger of pigeonholing yourself. And then all of a sudden they might not want to progress you into other areas because it's like, oh, well, you're so productive here that actually like we can't afford to lose you from this particular area anymore. But a large part of it out of any one watchmaker's control, whether you are absolutely excelling or you are kind of getting by, it often just comes down to needs of the business. So if they're seeing an increase in like, oh wow, we're seeing a lot more, let's
Yeah.
take Amiga as an example, we're seeing a lot more Speedmasters coming in with the 1861 calibers, and actually we don't have enough people to be able to service that caliber. Okay, well, we'll get some of the other watchmakers that have already been doing X, Y, and Z calibers and we'll train them on that. And then that way we can kind of increase the manpower that we have. So even with all the best will in the world, sometimes it's just something that is taken out of your control. It also does depend on your attitude and, how productive you are. If you are, let's say, they have productivity targets of 100% and they're expecting 12 and a half watches a week. If you are constantly sitting below that mark at like kind of 80, 85%, then you're not going to be offered the opportunity to go on to the next thing. You really need to be hitting that 100%. But if you're hitting 150%, then you are too productive in that area. So,
Oh, keep
it
them
could
there.
be,
Yeah, they're great.
yeah, exactly. So it could be a difficult kind of
It's
tightrope to
interesting. Yeah.
walk at times. But each brand will be different and, they'll kind of, for some places, they might be like, okay, once you've worked in a particular area for a certain amount of time, then it is time for you to move on to the next thing. Some brands will do it by an amount of years of service doing one particular thing. And so, yeah, there's no one size fits all kind of answer for it.
It's just curious because maybe we have listeners who want to get into watchmaking. Is there any shortcuts? But it doesn't really sound like it. It sounds more just having the right attitude and then also look for opportunities coming to you right at the right timing, and
Yeah,
like
I feel,
everybody has their own path, I guess.
yeah, exactly. I do think that a lot of it is kind of right place, right time. I also think that some of it is kind of carving things out for yourself as well, making yourself visible and known at the right places to the right people. That really kind of stands for a lot. I guess I'm very lucky and privileged that because I came from a sales role beforehand, I can interact with people in a way that a lot of watchmakers tend to be quite introverted. Sometimes they can come across as a little bit awkward or a little bit insular. And so having people that can actually hold a conversation with people also goes a long way. So I would really
Yeah,
recommend anyone looking at becoming a watchmaker, make sure you scrub up on your people skills as well, because it might come in handy.
Don't be
that's a good one.
boring.
Don't be introvert. Yeah.
Actually, that's one thing I will say is a lot of watchmakers I know always tend to have like quite cool, interesting hobbies outside of watches. So I guess because they kind of feel like they're so cooped up inside in their heads all day that, like, when it gets to the evening and weekend, they're quite often doing DJing or rock climbing or, all sorts of other
Extreme
things.
sports.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, no, it's fascinating. And there was just one extra thing I wanted. What came up while we were speaking earlier as well, and a rumor has always gone around that there's like a shortage of watchmakers. Is that true, or is that like a rumor? Because I know like prestige brands. I won't say the brands, but there are certain brands who are like, oh, the part of why our brand is so expensive is because we've got such a limited run because there's not enough watchmakers to the caliber who can produce these. Is that actually true, or is that like is
To
there a
some
real demand or
To some
shortage?
extent, yes. So I can't necessarily speak too much for the industry in Switzerland when they're talking about lack of watchmakers available to kind of make new product. I would say that it seems to me like there are lots of watchmakers in Switzerland, and from a brand perspective, I imagine it's more a case of if they put out millions and millions of watches, then chances are there won't be enough demand for what it is that they're making. So there needs to be some level of kind of scarcity. Also, when you're developing these like very, very expensive watches as well, there's only so many people that are actually in a tax bracket where they can afford to buy those. And so, in order to keep those things interesting and sexy for those people, you also need to keep them somewhat scarce and rare. So that would be my kind of take on that from a brand perspective, although that is just a personal opinion. I would say that for the UK, the British School of Watchmaking generally accepts between 6 and 8 students a year. There is another way that you can learn how to be a watchmaker in the UK, which is the Birmingham Jewellery School offers a degree in horology, so the BHI course. And I think they take maybe up to 30 students a year, but I don't know that they necessarily have 30 graduates that kind of graduate at the end of it. For people who are studying at the Birmingham Jewellery School, there's about 30 students a year that go there. And so, there's not that many people that are coming into the industry in the UK on any one year. However, we do have a whole host of people that are in their, late 50s, 60s, 70s who have been doing watchmaking for a really long time, who are now getting to the point where they're kind of coming out of it. So I think that there was a bit of a drive over the last 10, 20 years to try and make sure that those gaps of knowledge weren't going to be lost before all of these people had just kind of retired from the industry. So I think that we have kept things at a fairly even keel for the UK. You don't want to saturate the market with tons of watchmakers and then not have enough jobs for everyone. So whilst it sometimes feels like, oh, you know what, there are certain businesses where they could maybe do with an extra one or two people. It's not this almighty shortage where it's a case of like, oh my gosh, we're drowning over here. Like,
Yeah.
we need twice the workforce in order to get through everything. I think that actually there's a decent amount of watchmakers, and they are hidden away in weird little pockets of the country. I guess I live in central London, and so there are a lot of watchmakers here, but I think that, you kind of see them popping up in all of these weird and wonderful little places.
That's good to know. So you're not a dying breed. Our watches are
Not
safe.
yet.
Yeah.
They're safe for now.
Yeah.
And you can buy more watches and not have to worry
And break
about.
more watches. Yeah, throw
Someone
more
can
watches on the
fix them.
floor. Good to know.
I just want to ask a question on a point you just made there. Like people in their 50s, 60s are tending to move out of the game at this stage. Do you find it's a young person's game then, watchmaking? Or do you get people of all ages entering the occupation?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think for most people, if you were to imagine what does a watchmaker look like, you would probably think of like an old beardy man.
Yeah.
In
Einstein or
a
something.
Yeah, exactly. In like a dark little cave, like surrounded by like lots of tools everywhere. And I feel like modern watchmaking just feels like it's moved on quite far from there. And so I would say that the majority of people coming into it are a little bit younger. When I went to the watchmaking school, there were maybe 3 people that were looking at doing a bit of a career change, and they were in their kind of late 20s, early 30s. But you don't tend to find too many people later in life are looking at kind of veering off into it as a career. You do find that there are a lot of hobbyists who kind of look at picking it up because they want to have a little tinker with some of the things that they've picked up over the years, which I wouldn't necessarily recommend doing unless you really feel comfortable knowing what you're doing with it, because otherwise you might end up causing a little bit more harm than good. But I guess part of it is you need to have steady hands, good dexterity, and good eyesight. And so if you leave it a little bit too late in life to try and take it up, then you might be kind of limiting yourself a little bit.
Yeah, I think seeing the parts is probably going to be the biggest challenge as you get older. That's really interesting because we've been to like a factory visit or we've seen watchmakers in action. They're all quite young. It's a very mixed crowd, and everyone's quite young as well. So I don't think we hardly ever see like these Einstein types there, really. So that's interesting.
They were often around kind of in the 80s and 90s. And now I think, we've just kind of got past that threshold where we had, obviously the quartz crisis in the 1980s, where actually a lot of people left the industry. And there were a few people that kind of clung on or came back to it in the 90s. But actually, a lot of those people have just now got to a point where they have retired. And so it means that there is this fresh influx. But there was this kind of gap of knowledge for probably a good 20 years, 20, maybe 30 years, which is probably why there feels like there's quite this disconnect between the old guard and the new guard kind of coming in.
Interesting. So I did want to ask you, so you did Omega, so you're now at Subdial Watches, which is a pre-owned business, a very popular one in London, which covers pretty much every high-end brand and mid-range too. So being 100% Omega, how did you make that transition to, I mean, you're talking Patek Philippe, Rolex, Lange, Blancpain, you name it, you've got all of them. For yourself personally as a watchmaker, how did you make that transition into being able to do all of those, or do you not? How does that work?
Yeah, that's a great question. I guess because I was lucky enough to go to the British School of Watchmaking, and the course they do there is called a WASTEP course. So a Watchmakers in Switzerland training and education program. And what they're teaching you in that is just the fundamentals of how watches work. So the base of a watch movement, a mechanical watch movement, is kind of the same, regardless of what the brand is. There are a few fundamental key parts and components that must be there in order for a watch to operate. And then everything else on top of that is just a little bit of nuance. One brand might make a chronograph in this way, and another brand might make it in a slightly different way. And so when you have that kind of base knowledge and base understanding, that's already half the problem kind of accounted for. But that being said, that doesn't mean to say that it hasn't been daunting over the years. So I've been with Subdial for nearly 5 years now. And so I actually was introduced to the owners of the company by a mutual friend. And they were still quite a young business at that time. They'd only been going for around 3 years. And they were currently outsourcing all of their work. And so they wanted to find a way that they could bring that in-house. And because they don't come from the watch industry, they didn't really know where to start. So it was a case of, we had a couple of phone calls and conversations around what have you got in budget? for building a workshop, and what they had initially was very insignificant. And so, we had to have a stern conversation about, you're going to need to bump those numbers up because those are rookie numbers. And so, we had a few conversations around how much it's going to cost to build a workshop, the kind of equipment that's needed, the kind of space that's needed. You need to have a polishing room and a cleaning room that's separate from the majority of the watchmaking you're doing, because polishing's very dirty. And, it was all of these things that were kind of coming one after another. And they had just moved into their previous office, and they were asking like, oh, well, would you mind coming to have a look at our space and see whether or not you think that a workshop could actually be suitable in these premises? And I was like, let me check your address and see where you are. And it was very conveniently an 8-minute walk from where I lived. And I was like, oh my gosh, what a dream. So went down, had a look,
That's
and
lucky.
was
Yeah.
super lucky. And we were envisioning like, okay, so yep, this bit here that's kind of overlooking onto the canal, that could be the workshop. And then this section here could be the kind of cleaning and polishing room. Yeah, you could totally make something here. That's very doable. And they're like, would you be interested in building this for us? And I was like, oh, if I'd have known that this was a job interview, I would have sworn far less. Because I was just, I thought I was just kind of being helpful and doing them a favour, and I hadn't appreciated at the time that was necessarily what was happening. And it was just this very exciting opportunity where I was like, you know what? I reckon I could do this. I think I could build a workshop for them. And if, even though they're a small kind of startup and I'd be person number 5 coming into the company, which is very scary and daunting, coming off the back of COVID, where, I'd worked for the Swatch Group for such a long time. They'd been so good to me. But this is such an exciting opportunity, and I've completed all of the training that I can possibly do with Amiga, and there's no more upward progression for me here. So I'll give this a go. And if it all goes tits up, then I think Amiga will take me back. So, we'll just kind of take the plunge and do it. So the first step was really building a workshop, which that in of itself was so much more challenging than I had anticipated that it would be. It's one thing to just kind of sit as a watchmaker at a bench and just kind of repair the things that are in front of you. But when it's a case of like, okay, well, I do know all the equipment, but actually I've never had to set any of it up. And like, how do I sort out the extraction for this? And how do, it was all of those kind of piecing these bigger pieces together that was initially very challenging. And I think one of the first watches that they gave me to work on before we had the workshop properly set up, so we had this tiny, dark, little unlit cupboard, basically. And they're like, we've got this Langer that has a problem. Do you think you could have a look at fixing it? And I was
All
like,
right.
where? And they're like, well, there's like a space here with like a desk in it, if you could just like have a look in there. And I was like, these guys are absolutely wild. Like, there's no way that they are actually expecting me to do watchmaking in here. And then I actually, I took some tweezers and some screwdrivers with me, and I took the case back off, and I was like, oh, I actually can fix this, even though there's not a workshop. Which, they
Okay,
obviously
wow.
had faith in me in that scenario where I perhaps did not. So I think that there's having trust and faith in yourself when you're kind of looking at these pieces that maybe you're unfamiliar with. And imposter syndrome is very real, where sometimes you'll be like looking at something and feeling quite out of your depth. And sometimes you just kind of have to take a punt on doing something, even if it scares you, even if you've not worked on it before. And most of the time it works out for the best. And then you're able to kind of figure out where the problem is. You kind of come back to this fundamental knowledge of what you learned in watchmaking school, and you try and apply that in every aspect of what you do, then generally, like most of the time, you're going to be fine. Part of it is diagnosing things accurately from the get-go, realizing that actually this is something that's going to be more complicated or more nuanced, or it's going to need lots of replacement parts that we're just not going to be able to get hold of, in which case you can just make a decision from quite early on that this needs to go to a brand for a repair. But, I guess the worst thing that could possibly happen in reality is we try and fix something, we're not able to do it, and then we have to send it off to the brand and get them to do it. At the end of the day, I think once you have that kind of clarity in your mind of like, you know what, we're not doctors, we're not saving lives at the end of the day, actually that kind of gives a bit of a sigh of relief, and you kind of alleviate some of that pressure, and you're like, you know what, I'm just going to, at first it feels a bit like I'm just going to give this a go and see how it goes. And then after you've done that a couple of times, it's like, oh, actually, no, I've built up my confidence quite a lot on pieces that I never thought that I would have an opportunity to work on. And actually, it means that I'm in a very privileged position where I am working on annual calendars, occasionally perpetual calendars for these really amazing brands that would just be like completely untouchable otherwise.
You touched on one of the questions I was going to ask you, which is perfect timing. One
Well, you're so
was
welcome.
yeah, so I didn't even have to ask it. But I was going to ask, do you ever get overwhelmed? Like, oh, I'm in too deep with this. maybe you don't want to say, but what's probably the most challenging move? Let's do it like that. Like, what's the most challenging movement you've come across to date
Mm.
from which brand?
So for me, that's a really good question, actually. I'll caveat it by saying that I'm very lucky that in the workshop that I'm in, or the workshop that I've built, we've expanded the team out. So it's no longer just me doing the watchmaking and the very bad polishing. I'm not a polisher, so a polisher was definitely the first person that I hired into the team. We've got administrators, we've got other watchmakers. My partner's also a watchmaker, and he happens to work by my side, which is very helpful. And so if one of us is coming across something where we feel out of our depth, or we feel like it's presenting a problem that we just can't face as an individual, then we will kind of put it to the whole room and be like, I have this watch that's throwing up this quirk, or I just can't quite figure out why this element isn't working correctly. Then actually it means that we can kind of collaborate together, and between us we can normally figure out like why something isn't working together. So that has been a real relief, having other people around to kind of help alleviate some of that pressure. But in terms of the most challenging, I think one of the pieces that made me more stressed than any piece that I had worked on was probably a Gerald Genta perpetual calendar, where it was just really being a total bastard in every way, shape, and form. And it felt like nothing I was doing was working correctly. And I stripped it apart and put it back together again. I was like, no, it's still not working. I stripped it apart again, put it back together again. And I learned a lot about perpetual calendars in, in that.
Mm.
But
And
again, like,
yourself.
perpetual calendars are not something. And myself, yes. I did a lot of self-growing in that particular piece. I drank a lot of wine during that watch. More than anything, it's a case of giving yourself enough time to work on something. I think there are certain workplaces and environments that you can be in where there are immense pressures that are coming your way of like, no, you need to hit certain productivity targets and goals. And so you can't necessarily open your mind enough to something and give it the time that it needs. And luckily, we've tried to strike a really good balance at Subdial, where it's a case of like, okay, if you want to work on something that is sexy and exciting, then the team are welcome to work on that. But the flip side is like, we still need to make sure that there's plenty of pieces that are available for the drop videos. We still need to make sure that, so outside of Subdial, for buying and selling watches, we have a separate business called Looped, which is for pairs. So for people who aren't looking at just buying and selling, if you just want to have something serviced, then you can contact Looped. And so we do also need to make sure that those clients are well taken care of as well. So it's a case of, we need to still make sure that all of these things are flowing through, but I'm still going to allow you the time so that you can work on something that actually is maybe a little bit more sexy and exciting in comparison to what you'd be able to work on elsewhere. And occasionally, if someone's been working on something for 2, 3, 4 weeks, and you kind of have to be like, I'm going to ask you to pause this for now. I know that it's important that we still get this piece finished, but I still need other work to be completed as well. So I want you to not look at that for a week, and then let's work on something else, kind of reset. Sometimes that can be the most helpful thing, like taking a step back, working on something else, having a couple of easy wins, and then going back to something and being like, oh, this is where the issue is.
Back to the challenge again.
Now that
Yeah.
I've not just been staring at it constantly for a week or so, you kind of come back with a little bit of clarity.
Fresh eyes. You know, you've struck a real good chord, especially with me lately, because I've had a few watches go in. And one of the things where, I guess for watch collectors, we always think to ourselves, like, it's so frustrating because, you know, you take a car to get the tyres changed, you get an ETA, but with watchmakers, it's kind of a bit vague as to, in certain cases, when you're going to get your watch back. Like, Palm's a great example, right? With the Constellation, it took quite a bit of time, and it was a bit unknown
It was
when
a
you
big
get
window.
that, right?
It was a big
Yeah.
window they gave you, about 3 months.
How many months was that? Like
It
3
was about
months.
3
yeah.
months. It got done
Yeah.
within about 6 weeks, but still 6 weeks.
So you just
6 weeks, that's actually not bad.
but it's interesting.
They did
yeah,
say
but I
that.
think
They did
that's-
say that when I collected
Yeah.
it.
But I think that's good for listeners to understand that, and to understand the patience maybe what we need sometimes. And I think what you've said there is like, sometimes we just need that time to investigate it properly. And if you put pressure on us, we can't really do that job as thoroughly, you know.
Yeah.
So, including
Yeah,
myself,
so
because
there's
I get
that.
impatient with with having to wait.
So I guess there's that side of it. I guess when you're being given a lead time with regards to a service, there are multiple factors at play. So the first thing is often that there is just a queue of other work ahead of yours. And everyone would, I'm sure there are lots of people, maybe not everyone, there are lots of people that would be like, well, can't I just pay an extra 50% and jump the queue ahead of everyone? And Unfortunately, if we allowed that to happen for some people, then we'd have to allow it for everyone. Then all of a sudden, people that we'd already given a lead time to, you'd have to go back and be like, sorry, somebody else asked to jump the queue ahead of you. So actually, like, yours is
New
being
business
pushed back,
model,
and that's
bidding.
I don't-
yeah, quite.
I never
that could
thought
be
about
quite
that. You
profitable,
could be
actually. I'm like,
rich.
I'll feed that up the food chain. So, part of it is just that there is a queue of things ahead of you that need to be worked through. Part of it is also ordering spare parts. So, let's say that there are certain pieces that should be changed as part of every service. You should be changing gaskets where you can. You should be changing mainsprings in watches that are being serviced, because that's a part that's under a lot of torque and a lot of tension. You need to analyze what's needed in a watch. And so quite often you've had a watch that's been sat in a queue for a while, waiting for you to analyze it. You then strip it apart, and then all of a sudden it's a case of, okay, well, I need a mainspring and I need these gaskets and I need this obscure wheel. And then all of a sudden you place an order with the brand, and then it's out of stock. And then all of a sudden there's another 4 or 6 weeks before that part comes into stock in the UK. And then it takes another week before it gets to you. And that's before you've even started doing the service work. You might have dismantled it, but you still need to do any other necessary repairs. You still need to clean it and then put it back together. Then once all of that's done, you still need to test it and make sure that you're actually happy with the work that's been done. And then God forbid, at that point, it's like, something still isn't working quite right. Now I need to strip it back down again. Now that's quite rare. Normally, if you've done a good enough job when you're dismantling and when you're doing your diagnostic, then you shouldn't really need to go back in again. But it happens on occasion, and particularly when you're working on lots of different things, you need to be really vigilant whilst you're kind of doing these processes. But I can completely understand and appreciate when brands are giving these lead times of 16 weeks, 20 weeks, 50 weeks, 52 weeks if it's going to Switzerland for a vintage Swiss repair or something like that. I can see why that's really disheartening for people. Who are like, well, how long could it possibly take? Like, why is it possibly taking that long? In reality, I mentioned earlier, I can service 3
Yeah,
2892s in a day. That's not a problem at all. But it's a case of there's all of these other factors at play that just make it that much more difficult.
it's really good to get that insight because it's something we don't always appreciate. And
Also, it's just not really something that brands advertise. And so,
yeah,
how would anyone know unless someone's telling you?
yeah, exactly. I think it's important because once you can appreciate what's happening and the thoroughness of what's happening to your watch, then you're like, okay, I just need to take a step back and relax, and
Yeah.
it's worth it. But yeah, the great example, like I waited 6 weeks almost for the mainspring for my AP, the 2003 caliber. Again, I was like, why is it taking so long? I've seen so many online where they ordered this part from. And it's probably from the proper manufactured part, so it's correct, rather than,
Yeah.
me looking like, oh, there's one on AliExpress, what's wrong with that? So it's appreciating this kind of stuff, like you can't just put any rubbish inside it.
Yes, I would like to say we're not advocating for anyone putting AliExpress parts to any watches, like, really.
Yeah, I won't advise it,
I didn't even know they did parts. There you go.
Or Etsy, things like this.
And he's got an affiliate link to AliExpress.
Yeah. You're fed up of long lead
For
times
any watch parts,
for your APs, come to me,
Fed up of
I'll
lead
help you
times?
out.
Yeah.
Made out of spaghetti, but it'll do the job.
Is it just Andy Express now rather than AliExpress?
Yeah.
I think so, yeah.
I think that leads nicely to maybe my final question, and it's more around myth busting.
Oh, okay.
So is many myths, right? And I think it'd be good to maybe crack a few. Like it's so many, right? Is water resistance, where people complain about different water resistance levels. Like if I take a shower, what does it need to be? When should you service a watch? Things like this. How do you set a date? Is there a rule with certain calibers when you can set it whenever you like, or does it always have to be, at specific times? Watch winders, can you overwind an automatic watch? All these kind of things as crazy watch nuts worry about, which maybe we shouldn't sometimes.
I mean, some of these things are probably worth worrying about. So yeah, hit me with your myths, and then I'll see if I can debunk them for you.
Let's go with the first one, but the date, that's the classic one. Like,
So
is it the same rule for all or not necessarily?
not necessarily. So when it comes to date change on watches, it depends on what type of mechanism you have. So, let's say you take a ETA 7750 chronograph. For the most part, those dates will change somewhere between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. And so the mechanism will start engaging a little bit before that time window. So if you have your time set at 11 p.m. and then you're trying to flick the date over, you will break the kind of date change finger, and that is very detrimental, and then you need to pay for a full service. I think a safe bet for everyone is set your your time to like 6 o'clock in the morning or midday. Know that you're fully outside of any kind of window where it might be kind of causing some kind of like impact on the rest of the movement, and you'll always be safe. If you have something like a Rolex where you have an instantaneous date change, they generally have a tolerance of -2 to +2 minutes of when the date should be changing over if it's come straight from Rolex. With that being said, again, like you still have mechanism parts and components that will be starting to engage before that. So as much as the date itself flicks over at one particular window or one particular time, the changeover, there's more going on behind the scenes or under the dial than you might be expecting. So make sure that you have a nice clear window. So 6 a.m. would be my recommendation.
Okay, so 6 a.m. is the rule of thumb,
Yes,
just to be safe, right?
exactly.
And watch winders, this is one what people like. Are they damaging to an automatic watch, or is it fine?
So I have mixed reviews about
You don't sell them, do
watchfinders.
you?
We don't sell watchfinders, no.
All right,
we
you can
don't.
tell us then.
Sorry, yeah, you can cut
We
it
don't
out.
sell any watchfinders, no. So you're safe asking this question. I would say that if you have a perpetual calendar automatic watch and you don't want the faff of having to reset the perpetual, particularly if you have, let's say, a JLC where you just have one button in the side of the case that you have to advance 300 times if you want to take it forward by 300 days, where you don't have other correctors that might be able to kind of help advance the day, the week, the month, or whatever, then that is a good example of a watch that should probably be left on a watch winder, because if you're otherwise going to be advancing all of these calendar components, then that is going to introduce wear and tear, and it's just a different kind of wear and tear. If you have a watch on a watch winder, though, then the automatic is constantly going to be running, and the oscillating weight, which is kind of the main bit that kind of powers and charges your watch, is quite a heavy component. And so if you're keeping that rotating around constantly, then you are going to increase the wear and tear that you have on the watch. You know, the escapement is going to keep running, and so you might find that you need to service your watch more regularly than if you were not keeping it a watch winder. We now use synthetic oils when we are servicing watches, and so these are kind of made and built to last for longer periods of time. When watch oils were derived of animal fats, they had a tendency to kind of dry up a little bit more when they weren't being used. And so I think for older styles of watchmaking, then perhaps a watch winder might have made a little bit more sense, because it kind of helps keep things flowing around a little bit more. But with modern watchmaking, I wouldn't really say it's as necessary. I'd also say that, you know, when you're winding a watch, that's the kind of time that you're really connecting with it. And so I think that if you don't want to be the person that's kind of winding it and kind of giving it that life initially, then you might as well just have something quartz. Maybe
That's a
that's a
fair point.
controversial
Yeah.
take, but
Well, personally, I don't use watch winders, but I have one automatic watch, vintage though, so I
yeah.
definitely wouldn't put that on a, on a watch winder. Which maybe, I don't know. That again,
Yeah.
can you not? I don't know, but it's not something I personally do. I like to have that tactile
Yeah,
tactile
you know,
feel with a watch.
Yeah, I'd
They're-
leave it if I were you.
they're not going to cue.
For my track
yeah, maybe for
record,
you, Andy.
yeah.
I'd maybe have as least interaction as possible.
Yeah.
They're
Anybody
not,
else,
you know,
it's
they're
fine.
not going to cause any major harm. They're just going to increase the wear and tear that your watch is having. So it does just mean that your watch is probably going to need servicing a little bit sooner than if you weren't keeping it on a watch winder.
Yeah. Okay. That's interesting. Another one what comes up sometimes when I've spoken with friends, especially like around more vintage automatics. They're like, can I overwind it? I don't think you can, right? Like they have a clutch system and it will slip, but I guess if you do it too many times, it might wear that part out.
So in theory, an automatic movement where you do have this kind of slipping mainspring that kind of sits within the barrel wall, it can't be overwound. But with that being said, they are still under a lot of torque and a lot of tension. So as much as overwinding isn't necessarily a risk, they can occasionally still snap. They're still, you know, a part that's under a huge amount of tension. So it's not completely outside of the realm of possibility, but you winding it from the crown isn't going to be the thing that does that. Sometimes it's just a case of wear and tear over time. I think people have been surprised in the past when, you know, they've had an automatic watch where the mainspring has still snapped. And they're like, oh, but this isn't supposed to do this. This is an automatic. You're meant to just wind it forever. And it's like, you can, to an extent, yes, wind it for many, you know, give it many, many winds, and you won't get to that end biting point where you've kind of exceeded the amount of torque and pressure, but it's still a part that's subject to wear and tear. So it's still possible for it to snap, but it won't be from overwinding. It will just be down to the kind of general wear of it.
Okay. No, it's interesting because like my rule of thumb is give it like maybe 10 turns give it a shake on the wrist and then just wear it.
Ah, the old shake and wake.
Yeah. Sometimes fun just to shake it and then set the time and see how it does.
I would probably argue, particularly with vintage
Don't shake
watches,
it.
that shaking it is going to be much more damaging than giving it a proper wind.
Okay. That's interesting. Okay. Because a lot of people do that, right?
Yeah,
Like a lot of people
100%.
shake an automatic.
I'm not sure what we're talking about anymore. But, are we still talking about watches?
You must shake your watches if it's not. Well, not. I don't mean vigorously. I just mean
I
you just
wondered
give
what
it a
you were
little.
going to talk about there, Andy.
a
It's like,
waffle.
you've got to shake it. You've got to.
I've got to shake it to wake it. Yeah. Anyway,
Anyway, I think it's time to conclude. Don't know how we follow on from, but
I think I need a drink now. Cigarette.
Oh, Christ.
Right. Okay. Sorry, you were talking about myths.
Yeah, small myths, Andy. Hit me with them.
go on, Pam. You must have a few now.
The date change thing is the biggest one. What time you should set your date. Overwinding, that's another one, because I have broken a manual wind watch before my Hamilton khaki
Oh, wow.
field. Overwinding it.
And your car key was a manual wind rather than an automatic?
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, normally, I mean, a lot of it just comes down to tactile feel. So as you're winding it, you should normally feel when it's starting to come under pressure. And so once it gets...
I probably did. I just was probably just thinking, oh, I wonder what happens if I do this.
Yeah.
And I found out.
You fucked around and found out.
Yeah, exactly.
You normally
I
feel
shook
a
it a bit
hard
too
stop,
hard.
though. There's normally a hard stop, right? Where you can't go.
I can't think of any other myths. Watch myths.
I think they're the main ones, right? The watch winders.
Actually, Aimee, as a watchmaker, what are the silliest myths that you've been asked about from people?
I think a lot of people feel a bit afraid to ask a watchmaker the myth kind of questions because they're a bit worried that we're going to judge them really profusely for it. But actually, I would much rather that people would ask the questions rather than doing something that might be otherwise detrimental to a watch and then bring it back and being like, I did think about asking you about this thing and I didn't ask because I was embarrassed and now I've broken it. So please, can you unbreak it, please? My advice would be to the audience is if you have an opportunity to speak to a watchmaker and ask them a question about something, don't be afraid to ask because, for the most part, we should be very happy and very willing to help and try and keep your watches as healthy as possible for as long as possible. I guess if we were to go back to the date myth, the only other caveat would be when you're setting annual calendars or perpetual calendars, those can be a little bit more challenging and a bit more nitty gritty. And sometimes it changes from one brand to another. My advice would be if you have an opportunity of reading the operating manual, it is not a sexy read, but it's worth having a look through because it will vary from one brand to another. But, if we take Patek for an example, with their annual calendars, you're meant to set them to the first of the month, and then you're meant to set it to the 1st of January, and then you're meant to be able to advance it through before you can kind of correct it to where you currently are within the year. Otherwise, you can kind of desynchronize where the annual calendar mechanism is. So, when you have more complicated calendar mechanisms, if you don't feel confident doing it yourself, refer to the operating manual. You can always try taking it back to an AD. And if you're having issues with kind of setting it, then, they should be able to help you, even if you didn't buy it from them.
Okay, awesome. I have just thought of one. When you get a new watch, I've heard ADs, the sales assistant, saying, give it 20 winds. And is there a number of how many winds, how many revolutions you should give that watch? And they even say you can go backwards and clockwise and anti-clockwise continuously. What's the difference between going one direction all the time or both?
Most watches, I'm not going to say all because there are a few watches where they have separate barrels where when you wind the crown in one direction, it winds one barrel, and when you wind it in the other direction, it winds the other barrel. That is rare. For the most part, when you're winding, you are moving the crown in a clockwise direction, and that is what's kind of delivering power to the mainspring. When you wind it in an anti-clockwise direction, you'll notice that it sounds different and it feels different in your fingers. And essentially what's happening is there is a safety mechanism built into this area of components that's called the keyless work. So it kind of stems from old clocks and pocket watches where you had to insert a physical key to wind them up, and then Abraham Louis Breguet helped kind of revolutionize the keyless work, which meant that you had this button that sits on the side of your case that you can wind something without having to lose your key and then having a locksmith have to make you a new key every time you lose it.
Is
So
it bad though to go the other
it
way?
is it's not causing any harm whatsoever. So part of
Okay.
this mechanism actually contains something that is called Breguet teeth. And so they sit at a particular angle and they slide and glide off one another really, really seamlessly. I think I am yet to encounter a mechanical watch that doesn't have these Breguet teeth as part of the keyless work. It is such a fundamental part of watchmaking, this kind of safety mechanism that just means that these components just kind of glide over one another, and it just helps to prevent the mainspring from unwinding in any way. So it doesn't cause any harm, but it also doesn't give you any juice or any power. So you really have to wind it in that direction where, you can kind of feel there's a little bit more torque and
Yeah.
a bit more
So
resistance.
full revolutions,
So it should
basically.
be full revolutions. So I can give you some examples. So an ETA 2892 caliber needs 66 full revolutions of the crown in order to fully wind it from being empty without any power. If you have an Amiga 8500 caliber, so it was kind of their first like in-house caliber, you need to wind that 88 times in order to fully wind both of the barrels. So I also, when I worked in retail and I didn't know anything about anything, would tell people like, oh yeah, like 20 winds, that's probably fine.
My brother-in-law bought his Patek. They said 20 to 30 wines, and they were going backwards and forwards as well. And I was thinking, I'm sure it needs a bit more than that.
Yeah,
But
the doing it backwards and forwards is more comfortable rather than being like, okay, I'm going to go 1, 2, and like you really try to feel around for it can just be a bit kind of, it can feel a little bit taxing on your fingers and it can otherwise, cause you a little bit of a callus.
yeah,
Versus doing the rocking backwards and forwards just feels a little bit easier. But if you're doing that, you're
Like a
essentially doing,
ratchet.
yeah, exactly. It is a ratchet mechanism.
Mm.
But you are essentially doing half the amount of winding. So if you're doing the backwards, forwards, backwards, forwards, backwards, forwards, then you need to do twice as much in order to get it fully wound.
Yeah, I don't think anyone fully winds it anyway, because if it's an automatic, I think you can do half, and then actually this is a good one. Can you just do like a few, and then your wrist action will rotate the
You shake and wake and does the rest.
What wrist action are you talking
the
about?
turn of the wrist will turn the rotor enough to keep your watch happily wound all day.
Depends on the activity, I guess.
No, you are completely right there, though, Andy. It completely depends on how active you are. So if you give your watch, let's say, like 30 winds in the morning, and then you sit in your car and you drive to an office, and then you sit at a desk all day, every day, and you're just kind of click-clacking away on like a keyboard, you're not really doing much movement. And so just having it on your wrist, but in a relatively stationary position throughout the majority of the day, isn't going to wind it for you. You have to be really quite physically active. You need to be doing quite a lot of walking for the pendulous motion of the oscillating weight to actually do something. There are some automatic watches as well where they actually only wind in one direction rather than winding in both directions. So it's either a unidirectional or a bidirectional oscillating weight or automatic mechenism.
Okay, so it just depends. Everything just really depends. I mean, my watch has never stopped, even though I've been working at my keyboard or when I work from home. I've given it the odd, the 20 turns on the crown, and I'm sitting at my desk. I suppose you're moving up. No one sits at the desk all day. You're obviously going to move around. So yeah, I've never had it stop on me. So
Okay, that's great news. I will say that, when we're testing watches to see how well their automatic is functioning, there's a few things that we can do. So the first and most well-known thing that watchmakers would do is they would fully wind a watch, they will let it run down for 24 hours, and then if it's a watch that will automatically wind in both directions, then you'll put it on what's known as a windmill, which is kind of constantly rotating round, and it will sit there for 2.5 hours in constant motion. If it's something that only winds in one direction, then it will likely have to sit on there for around 4 hours in order to build that power back up. And that's after only 24 hours of running. And so that's a lot of motion. No one's kind of walking around constantly looking like they're training to be a boxer, going for those kind of punching bags. That's not a natural way for anyone to
yeah.
be. And so you do have to, particularly for people that will only just kind of shake their watch, maybe give it 5-10 winds, and then expect it to still reach its full power reserve. They might end up feeling a little bit disappointed when that's not going to happen. But realistically, the power reserve is based on the watch being fully wound from the beginning. And I think that's something that a lot of people do tend to fall short of.
To conclude, just on manual winds, I typically will wind my manual watch until I just feel that it kind of just springs back on you, and you know it's time to stop. So I normally fully wind a manual. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Or is it very... Yeah.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. And actually, whether it's vintage or particularly with modern watches, when brands are talking about their timekeeping tolerances of, let's say they're expecting something to keep time within -2 seconds or +2 seconds, what they are guaranteeing is that for the first 24 hours of its power reserve, that it's going to perform within those parameters. After the power starts to wind down past that point, they are no longer guaranteeing that that is how that watch is going to perform. So, even if you have something that has a 3-day, 4-day, 7-day, 8-day power reserve, a lot of the time these brands are not guaranteeing that you will get those really, really impressive timing results throughout the entire length of the power reserve. So keeping your watches fully wound will give you more consistent timekeeping. As the power winds down, you have less energy that's kind of making its way through the gear train, and then that can give you slightly erratic or inconsistent timekeeping. So towards the end, where you've got almost no juice left in the watch, is when you have kind of the most inconsistent timekeeping. So if you're finding that like, oh, my watch isn't performing very well, you should check and make sure that you're fully winding it before you're putting it on your wrist, before you kind of jump to any conclusions thinking like, oh, this one's in need of a service. You should, give it some proper winding and give it a proper run for its money first.
Okay, so it's good practice then, because I always, normally if I'm wearing, most of my watches are manual apart from one anyway. Normally every day I just take it to the max again. And then that's when, like you say, that's when you're in that best torque range, right? That's when it's delivering the most stable performance and power from the mainspring,
Exactly.
Okay, so I'm doing something right.
It really is.
Not the shaking of the automatic, but the winding of the manual is all right. Yeah, cool.
You also had a question about water resistance, is that right?
Yeah, to finish it, people always think like, what's the difference between like splash proof or what really is adequate for like swimming in the sea and things like this? Like, is 100 meters adequate for surface swimming, or is it recommended like your 300 meter is really where you should be at for that kind of activity?
So my general advice would be that if you have something that has a screw down crown, then, and it's, water resistant to 50 meters, 100 meters, then you should be absolutely fine for kind of the majority levels of swimming. If you have a watch that has pushers or correctors where you have different kind of date components and whatnot, then those can just be a potential kind of failure point from like a water resistance perspective. So whilst the watch might be sealed and water resistant before you go into the water, if you then operate any of those parts and components, then you have the risk of potentially kind of injecting water into the watch. So if you were to ask me when I worked for a brand and the rule had to be, oh no, if your watch is marked as 30 meters of water resistant, then you can in fact swim to 30 meters. And that is the stance that brands will take. They will test their watches to, in theory, like a theoretical depth. Quite often it's using an air pressure rather than a water pressure tester. But they will say like, nope, if someone wants to go swimming with their 30-meter watch, then they are welcome to do so. It wouldn't be my personal recommendation, but at the end of the day, if you have a new product that is under a brand guarantee or it's under a service guarantee that is authorized by a particular brand, then in theory you are allowed to do those things.
Yeah. Okay.
But yeah, I would say that if it has a screw down crown and it's 50 meters, then that should be fine. If it's 100 meters water resistant, then for the majority of swimming, that's also fine. I think it also kind of depends on what swimming you're doing. At the end of the day, these watches themselves aren't like, oh, nope, you've taken me to 31 meters, not 30. It's kind of rated on a pressure, essentially. And so if you're doing just like a gentle breaststroke, then you should be fine. That's not an innuendo. That's just...
You're worse than us.
No, but like typically most people do surface swimming, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I was laser focused.
I was looking at you, Palm, when I said that, actually. But if you're doing, if you're doing, I'm going to call it a more aggressive, but if you're doing a more aggressive kind of swimming technique, like butterfly, for instance, the amount of pressure that's going onto those parts and
Yeah.
components is just a bit more. And so, these are all things that should be kind of taken into account and into consideration. If you have something that's only really rated to 30 meters and you want to go butterfly swimming, then you should probably take it off.
Because also there's the contact, like you're hitting the surface of the water, and that's putting shock through the
Mm.
watch, right? At the same time, like
Yeah. I do wish that I wish that more brands would put like a pressure rating of like, hey, this is what this watch should be rated to rather than this metering, because I do think that it can be a bit misleading depending on, all of these different kind of factors that we've
yeah,
just discussed. If a brand were to be like, okay, we've rated this watch to 3 bar or 30 psi or whatever it might be, and that means that you can do these things. And actually, if they were to kind of display that a bit more clearly, then I actually think that that would alleviate a lot of kind of stress and pressure from a
but
lot
it
of
stops
people.
accidents from happening, I think, as well
Yeah,
with
it really
watches,
does.
because you just assume that you go online, you read what it says, and you're like, okay, that'd be fine. But if you can cause damage just by the technique of swimming you're doing, then it's something you need to know, I think.
I think that the majority of the listeners that you have will probably be watch collectors of sorts, where they might have a few pieces in their collection. But if you have one watch, because like that is the thing that you have, and a brand tells you that you can swim to 30 meters or 50 meters, then like, you're going to trust what they're telling you. And,
Yeah,
they might not necessarily be asking the same kind of questions that you're asking or that your listeners might be asking. And so, I think it's an important kind of conversation to be having.
yeah, no, it's a good one. I think most of us, the only diving we do is around the desk, right? Not in the water so much. So I think in most cases we're safe.
I think we're coming towards the end of the show, but I do want to ask you one more question, Aimee. You're hosting an event at
Hmm.
Subdial.
I am indeed, yes. It is a women's event, and we have some amazing speakers who are going to be on our panel. We have Caroline Andrew, who is a tailor on Savile Row, and the purpose of this is meant to be kind of highlighting some women who are working in male dominated fields. And I think that Savile Row is, without a doubt, incredibly male dominated. So I'm really excited to hear what she has to say. We also have Kathleen McGivney, who's the CEO
Yeah.
of Red Bar Group, who is also just like a wonderful human being. She's incredibly charitable. She's had a career based in tech and IT before kind of moving into the watch world. So again, all incredibly male dominated spaces. And so we're going to be hosting this evening where Brit Bones, who is at Increase of Brit on Instagram. She's really kind of iconic and worth following. She's really charming, really charismatic. She's also just a total knowledge sponge. She really kind of absorbs a lot of information. She's going to be moderating our panel, and we're going to be discussing some challenges and some successes about being women in male dominated spaces. We're going to have a mixture of women who are going to be attending as guests, some people who are already keen collectors, some people who might be interested in becoming collectors one day, and some people who might not have ever tried a luxury watch on before. And so it's a case of, trying to branch out to people who aren't yet aware about watches as a potential hobby or interest for them. As we all know, like obviously Palmer, I've known you for a number of years through various Red Bar meets and Subdial watch meets, and they are without a doubt a sausage fest. And so,
Oh,
if there's
yes.
anything that if there's anything that we could do to try and kind of balance those scales slightly, then I think that it's worth at least trying. And so, hopefully it's going to be a really lovely evening. I've hosted it twice before, and generally, like we've always got a really positive response off the back of it. So after we've done our panel talks, I'll be doing this kind of ridiculous, whimsical watches and wine pairing. So, we'll kind of
Watches and
shoehorn
wine. Okay.
uh,
So are you
watches and
pairing
wine.
watches with wine? What's the concept here?
Yeah, so I'm trying to base it on different themes and characteristics. So, the first wine that we're having is actually it's a Tokai from Hungary. It's a ferment grape. So it has this slight kind of floral note. It's quite mineral. It has this kind of delicacy to it, but it's still quite intricate. And so I'm probably going to pair that with a couple of like dainty, delicate kind of maybe vintage pieces. Then we're going to move on to a Chablis, which is really classy. It's crisp, it's elegant, it's refined. And then that's probably going to be on the table with a bunch of different Cartier pieces. So it's about trying to build an association in a way that people might not have traditionally thought about either watches or wine. Wine is like my hobby outside of watchmaking. And so it's a case of, hopefully people have a bit of a laugh. I'm going to hopefully shoehorn a couple of random rogue pieces in there. The last wine we're going to be doing is it's a Monastrell Cab Sauv blend from 2017 in Spain, close to Alicante. It's really big, it's bold, it's really punchy, it's quite complex. And so it means that we have an opportunity there to kind of get some big punchy watches on people's wrists that they might not have ever considered kind of trying on before, maybe some complicated langers or something like that. So, it gives us an opportunity to showcase some pieces to people that maybe wouldn't have known about us
Okay.
beforehand. And it gives people to try on watches that maybe they didn't even know existed.
Yeah, that sounds really cool. How many people do you normally get at the event? You say this is your third one that you're doing?
This is the third one that we're doing. We are expecting between 40 and 50 people. So we try and keep these a little bit smaller than our regular Subdial watch meets, just by virtue of the fact that we have a bunch of our stock that's going to be out on display for people to try on. And so we need to make sure that our kind of numbers and spaces are quite limited. I also need to make sure I know how much wine I'm buying. So,
I was thinking
who
the
knows?
wine probably came into it as well. How many bottles?
Exactly.
This is the good stuff.
Yeah, exactly. I'm very, very lucky. Shout out to Humble Grape, who are my wine supplier, who have been helping me on my wine journey for the last 3 or 4 years now. So I've got a good
Wine
relationship with
journey.
them.
Okay. Excellent. Sounds my wine journey. That's
Yes,
a whole
exactly.
different take on things. Yeah.
It really is.
So, okay, just a quick, I'm going to play a little game quiz.
Oh, yeah,
thing.
go for it.
So, each of us has got a watch on. Starting with your own, what
Hmm.
wine would you pair with the watch that you're wearing? And then you go around and.
I predicted that you might ask this question, and I'm actually drinking the wine that I would pair
Okay.
with my watch. So I am drinking a Cremant d'Alsace. It sat on its lees for 3 years. So for those that don't know about what lees are, essentially when you have a sparkling wine that's made in a traditional method, it sits on the yeast and that kind of creates these slightly more brioche, biscuity kind of flavors that you tend to find mostly in champagne. This is actually from a really nice producer called Gilg, which are based in Mittelbergheim in Alsace. It is mostly Pinot Noir heavy. There's a little bit of Riesling, a little bit of Pinot Blanc. So it has this really kind of fresh minerality, but because it's sparkling, I just thought it's the perfect match for my Piaget, which has this beautiful bark white gold bracelet where there is just this like stunning kind of shimmery kind of aesthetic to it. There's no diamonds on it, so it's not blingy, but it still has this kind of like understated kind of shimmer and sparkle. And I
So
kind of feel like
cool, yeah.
Cremant is the perfect kind
Wow,
of
look at
pairing
that.
for that.
Okay, yeah, sparkly, yeah, bit of fizz in there.
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, so Andy's next.
Ooh, the Calatrava. Let me take it off 1 second. Pipe and dial, and then it's all like
It
a
is lovely
pink
to be
It's
gold.
fair.
gold, yeah.
It's clearly, as much as it's just come back from a service, it's clearly something that's quite robust. It has gold properties, and so it kind of has a little bit of longevity coming through from that. I would probably pair it with something a little bit unusual because it's an unusual choice, but maybe like a Cabernet Franc or something like that. It's something that can actually age really well. It's still like a classic grape varietal from the Bordeaux region of France, just like JLC is a classic and traditional kind of watch brand. But it has just like this little pop of interest that kind of comes along with it. It creates this kind of grounding flavor that actually just makes for a very, very nice bottle of wine. It also blends really well with other things, which works really well for a JLC because obviously they've been using their movements in many different manufacturers over the years. So I would say a Cab Franc.
Perfect. Now I need to check it out.
And what about you, Palm? What have you got that's going to quiz
I've
me on?
got the Constellation, the perpetual
Oh, yeah, of
calendar,
course.
two-tone, but it's got a diamond cut argyle dial.
Yeah, they're super stunning, those. I've serviced quite a lot of those over the years, and I do actually really
Obviously
like them.
quartz, so it's very slim.
Yeah, it's such a lovely piece. I'm going to say that because you've got steel and gold in it, you've obviously got the bimetal. I think this wants to be a blend, but it's also got the complexity of being a perpetual calendar. So I'm going to say, where do we want to go in the world for this? I feel like I've already gone to Bordeaux, so I feel like I can't go back to Bordeaux, but I'm leaning towards Bordeaux again. Like I feel like it's just like a traditional, like, yeah,
You can
I
go
feel
Bordeaux
like,
if you like.
it's a it's a really iconic piece, and actually it has this depth and it has this complexity to it. And I feel like a Margot Bordeaux is like the perfect kind of encompassing of that. It's the perfect kind of aspect ratio from the river. It's got all of this lovely kind of juiciness to it that when you see it, you're just like, oh, I just love it. I just want to put it on. It's got this good blend of different grapes alongside of being still a very nice complex wine. And, it's also just like a general crowd pleaser.
So is that a white or red that you're talking about?
It will still be a red. It will be a
Okay.
red, but because it's a blend of different grapes. So quite often within Bordeaux, you'll have a mixture of Merlot, Cabernet Sauvignon, and Cabernet Franc tend to be like the main three grapes
okay.
that make up Bordeaux wines. Margaux is probably my favourite region of Bordeaux itself for the wine that comes out of there. And I really like a perpetual calendar, so
Little fuss, not much fuss to it. It does everything. It does everything for you. So that's the beauty of it.
Yeah, exactly. It's such a clean aesthetic for something that's a perpetual calendar. All you have is that little date
Yeah.
window.
It is really like Mozart do that as well. It's just you look at it, and think, that can't be a perpetual calendar. Perpetual calendars all have these dials everywhere and loads of words and things. But all it does is change the date at the end of the day, doesn't it? Change the date for you.
Yeah, it does. But I find them more than anything, I think they're very satisfying to set. When you pull the crown into the correct position and then you're working your way through the different stages of the perpetual calendar, there's just something that's just like very satisfying about setting them. I don't know if you've had an opportunity to actually set it yourself.
After I had to get it serviced, I don't do anything because it's quartz, so I just let it do everything itself.
Ah, no, you should unset it so that you can reset it just because it's very satisfying to do.
Okay, I'll give that a go. And
Next time I see you, I will show you how you can do it and we can go through it together.
okay, I'll wear it next time. Yeah, next time you're out, and then I'm sure we can coordinate something.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so I think that is officially all we have time for. It's been a really fun show. It's been a really informative show. I mean, this is our first show with a watchmaker. Blimey, I think we need to get a few more on because watchmakers rock.
Maybe your next one will have less innuendo. So
It's Matt, but
Yeah, it's great.
oh no, you'll have more innuendo if you have Matt.
he's been considering it for about 3 years and he hasn't come on yet. So it's been great to have you on and amazing to have a watchmaker on. Andy, do you want to see us out?
Yeah, I'll do my classic. So, Aimee, thank you so much for your insights and your time. It's been fascinating. It's been fun. And as always, it's adios, hasta luego from Barcelona. And you'll hear me on the next one. I'll hand over to Palm to sign off. Yeah.
And as Andy says, farewell for Barcelona in Spain. Aimee, is there anything you'd like to say to the listeners as you bid them farewell?
Yeah, I mean, thanks for having me on. This is my first podcast, so please be kind in the comments. But outside of that, if you're looking at buying watches, selling watches, checking the value of your collection, then head over to subdial.com. If you're looking at having your watches serviced, then you can find me at www.loops.co.uk. If you just have burning questions, you want to reach out to me directly, you can find me on Instagram at Aimee Cowhig. But yeah, thank you guys for having me. It's been such a pleasure.
It has been an absolute pleasure. As Aimee says farewell from London, from me, it's Toodle Pip and layers, and we'll see you and you'll hear us in the next one.